All right, let's talk about it. The angry chef. Grr. It's a stereotype, a well that writers, filmmakers, and TV show producers, and so on, have gone to over and over and over again. And it's always paid off. As long as there have been cooks in kitchens, there have been grumpy chefs, barking orders and getting everyone in line to meet the demands of cooking for others in a timely manner. But why are there so many angry chefs out there? Why is it celebrated? And what is at the core of all that anger? My name is Paul Silva. The podcast is Seared, Stories from the Stove podcast. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about anger. And I'm going to start with some stories, or I'm going to intermingle some stories about yours truly that I'm not particularly proud of, but may shed some light on what can often be underneath anger and how to handle situations when anger is about to get the better of you. So, stick around. Thanks for joining, homie. So chuffed having you here. Today, we're just going to jump in. I don't have a lot to share. Actually, I always have a lot to share. I'm lying. But you're not here for that. The Paul Silva, if you want the Paul Silva updates on a regular basis, you can check out my social media. That's where you get the fun, goofy, serious, educational, etc., stuff. You can follow me on Threads, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Don't bother with LinkedIn. And don't get me started on LinkedIn. My username is @TheRealPaulSilva. You'll find that on all of them. Really simple. So follow me. It's worth it, you dingnut. All right, enough of that. Let's make with the loofah and get down to brass tacks. Now, of course, you will notice if you are watching, if you're listening, you're not going to know. I'm in my whites. Why am I in my whites? I don't know. I was just as what's his name? What's that song? The wind just kind of pushed me this way. Robbie Robertson. I just had, maybe it's because I want to get into character of some kind. Maybe that's it, because we are talking about angry chefs. Kind of like, what you mad at, bro? Okay, let's slow it down here for a second. I'm getting hype. I'm getting amped. What is it with angry chefs? I don't know. Well, I do know. I know plenty. But overall, sometimes I wonder where did it start? Who was the first? I'm going to say guy, because back in the Scoffier's day, etc., it was just men. But who was that first guy that decided, I'm going to set the tone for the rest of all the generations of chefs out there? But I will get down to some of this. Now, I'm going to change things up a little bit in terms of, I'm going to dive right into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about, and then share kind of how I showed up in ways that were very stereotypical as well. And I'll probably share why they didn't work. It's not the fun stuff I like. Actually, I do enjoy sharing it because it's good for me to look back, and it's also for you to, the lessons are there, right? Like how I could have done better. So in terms of the angry chef stereotype or trope, there's many reasons on the surface. We can look at what is it that brings chefs to that place of, you see the screaming and the yelling and the shouting and the throwing of pots and pans, etc., etc. And the causes, if you look at it, it makes sense, right? Like, it's hot in the kitchen. It's very time sensitive. Like, you gotta, it's like, what have you done for me lately? Kind of way of that kind of environment. It's high pressure. It's demanding. A lot of times chefs get little sleep. They're not eating very much. I know I didn't eat much, which is weird that you're in the kitchen. You have owners and bosses to deal with. You've got your reputation to deal with, physical work. You're getting burned and cut. And there's all sorts, it's like a little pressure cooker that happens.
Fuck off my Expo chef now!
And so sometimes we think, okay, well, it's justified, right? Like, of course, if I was under all those conditions, I'd fly off the handle too. But understand this. Other professions work in kind of not quite similar, of course, but there are other professions that work under pressure Again, like life or death. Some of them are literally life and death. And if you think about firefighters or, paramedics, 911 operators on the phone, and maybe not so first respondery, you have maybe teachers, you have referees, I was thinking about, right? Like at the talk about pressure. You're just the one person and everyone's on you no matter what you say or do. And there's all sorts of other pressures out there, but no one is losing their minds. So why is it that chefs get like this pass, like this free pass? I'm just like, Hulk smash. I think it has to do, well, there's many reasons. There is culture. That's a huge one. What is modeled to us, what we see, what we've heard. Look at all the shows that are out there. Again, I mentioned at the top, TV shows and movies, all that kind of stuff. You look at like Burnt, The Menu, The Bear, right? And listen, I don't watch chef shows. I've mentioned that in the past, but I'll watch those little clips of The Bear where everyone's losing their minds. It's like, oh yeah, I've been there. It's Boiling Point. And then of course, Gordon Ramsay, Kitchen Nightmare, all those shows. Funny thing, I've met Gordon Ramsay. He's a sweet guy. And you see it when he's working, like he's with kids. He's the sweetest guy, but it makes good TV. Now, he apprenticed under Marco Pierre White, who he had a temper too. So this is again culture. This is learned. This is modeled. And so a huge part of this is that's just what it is, quote unquote. That's just how it is, right? And there's this resignation where people just say, well, that's how my chef was and that's how their chef was. But no one's stopping to think, is this the best thing? Right? Other reasons, like this, when you get into actually maybe what the truer causes of why chefs just lose their minds. And this is not all chefs do. We're talking kind of like a generalization. And I worked for chefs who did freak out. Absolutely. And I also worked for like some of the best chefs that were one of the best leaders, some of the best leaders I've ever worked with. So when I was in the industry, this was in the mid 90s I started. So that was still there. It was already starting to transition in the 2000s, I feel. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But there was a bit of that kind of opening and softening, if you will. But definitely, I worked for some real whiz bangers. But insecurity is one of the things that comes up for me when I look back and think of all the chefs that I knew of, either I worked for or I knew of. Insecurity is a huge one. And this cuts for anyone. This is not just about chefs, but insecurity, what is underappreciated, right? Chefs are notoriously underpaid in general, underpaid, the hours they work, right? I can't tell you how many 80, 90-hour weeks I used to work, and I didn't feel like I was appreciated many times. And with that is no balance. So we're talking now a pressure cooker, people that have no work-life balance or integration, whatever you want to call it. And so that also sets up the scene. Ego, oh my God, ego, thick enough, rich enough to drizzle it over waffles. Ego, huge part. And again, that is part of culture. That's been shown. There's that old joke that God must think that they're a chef, right? Like ego is massive. And then of course, mental health and addiction. I can definitely speak to the addiction part. And so when you have this cocktail, no pun intended, of things with all the sort of external, right? So I talked about the external, like the maybe lack of sleep and all, and then more of this internal stuff. It is a fuse that's ready to just be lit at any moment. And again, why is it chefs? it's this culture. It's been ingrained. We see it glorified or celebrated in shows. And so all these impressionable up and coming, chefs, they see this and go, that's how I was supposed to be. And that was my experience many times. Like, when I was not, like, I know it's hard to picture me, oh, sweet me, like angry and freaky and all that. I was at times, I wasn't an angry chef all the time. I wasn't. A lot of that anger went inward for me. But believe me, it did come out. And I remember sometimes I'd be in the prep kitchen. I wouldn't do it in an open kitchen, but I'd be in the prep kitchen or somewhere where people couldn't see me. And I would be screaming. I'd be throwing stuff. I'd be breaking shit left, right, and center. Denting pans, like kicking fridges. I did it many times. Again, not proud, but I didn't have the emotional bandwidth or the understanding of what to do, because a lot of times I reduced it down to like, well, that's what chefs do. We're just built that way. And we're not. I've screamed at people until they cried or quit. Again, not proud. One thing that did help me, and anyone who's worked in hospitality will laugh at this, because you'll know, is you go into the walk-in freezer and you just punch and kick bags of ice or whatever. You can scream into the void and people probably wouldn't hear you. And so that did help. But that was like, sometimes it felt like rage, like absolute rage. And for me as well, I mean, I'm going to get that in a second, but there was also a time in the last place I worked, and I was sober, I was clean. I couldn't chalk it up to addiction or anything, where this was a very busy kitchen, very big numbers. And it was me and my whole squad. And there was someone in front of me. I was on what's called the pass. I was expediting. So I'm not in the kitchen. Like, I'm not on the line. I'm on the other side. And that's where all the chits come in. And I'll call, like, get this ready, get the medium rare steak, I was very good at expediting, by the way. No ego, right? But I was. And there was we were getting up to service, and there was one cook who was problematic. And he was just getting into a little tussle with one of the other cooks. And he wasn't listening. And I was kind of slamming the pass, like, and yelling his name. I don't want to say his name. I was like, bah, bah, bah. He wasn't listening. I was like, bah, bah, bah. And I was slamming. And in that moment, I just lost my marbles. There was something about this defiance that got me. And I marched around the pass, down the line, and everyone's looking at me like, is he going to kill him? Is he going to throttle him? And I got like this close to his face, and I just screamed at him, just absolutely leveled him. And needless to say, that caused me a lot of headache for a long time. I'm talking HR, I'm talking, shop stewards and meetings, and it was messy. And doesn't matter how justified I may have felt, in the end, as a manager, as a leader, I lost my cool, and it was about me all of a sudden. And rightly so. I could justify it as much as I could, and a lot of people are like, yeah, it was about time you you barked at him. I had support, but at the end of the day, I did feel a little bad. And not a lot of excuses. There's no excuses, And a lot of times in these things, like, I could say that I was under strain. Back in the day, my addiction definitely had something to do with it. I mean, my drinking was kicking my ass. I could say I felt unseen, underappreciated, and tired, exhausted. And I was just not in a healthy emotional place. And things would just happen, and I would just explode. And I would just get it out of my system and then move on. And it was just, I was at a very heavy denial part of my life. where I didn't believe at all that I was an angry person. Like at all. If you ask me, I was like, I'm not angry. I'm not angry at all. And there I am punching and beating things and screaming at people till they quit or cry. And it wasn't until I got sober, years after, that I learned just how angry I was. Like I learned how many resentments I was carrying. Like it was like a big satchel of resentments. And I also learned just how much I loathed myself, hated myself. And that, of course, spills on to others. It can only be that way. And, well, here's the thing. Like, you know, as I hear myself even say that, the other part of me is like, you can say, well, so what? We all have problems, right? So why is it acceptable that chefs, again, why is it acceptable that chefs can lose their minds and we just all acquiesce? And we say, yes, chef, no, chef. And then we just take the verbal or even physical abuse, right? Like a dog. Well, like I said, there's no one reason I can say. I've mentioned a few. And I'm really happy to say that this has been changing, as I mentioned earlier. You know, we are moving away more and more from the cult of personality of angry chef in many ways. And yes, Gordon Ramsay and all those will probably still be there making good TV. But I feel like we're going to see less and less of that. You know, it's celebrated still because it makes good drama on the screen. Behind the scenes, we take it as being part of the chef's artistic temperament. We tolerate the abuser because of some antiquated notion that they're somehow godlike. Again, ego. Hello, ego. But we're starting to see a turning away from that, which is fantastic. And I think it's important. And I think there's many reasons why we're seeing this. I think it's very healthy. One of the things I believe is the new generations that are in with millennials and Gen Z. They're not taking that shit. You know, boomers and Gen X's like me, when someone said jump, you said how high? And you would do it. You put your head down, shut up, and do it. You're not seeing that much now. Yes, I mean, this is generalization, so calm yourselves down. But you're seeing a shift, and this is in all workplaces with Gen Z and millennials, because they see things through the eyes of what is, like, what their values are, what the company stands for. And they're not gonna lay low. And so when this is a whole different I talk about this a lot with the different generations, boomers and Gen Xers, maybe some of the older millennials, I don't know. But this idea of like, why don't they just listen? Why don't they just put their head down and do it? They're not built that way. And I'm really happy they're not. They're questioning more. And I think that's marvelous. I think we're also seeing more sensitivity to trauma, to understanding mental health more. We're starting to understand that this is not productive and this is going to trigger people. And I'm not, you know, people do make fun of this, like trigger, oh, the safe space, all these people do, you know, shut up. Shut up. You know, suppressing all that stuff is not healthy. And we as leaders in the culinary industry and all leaders, we do, it's a reality that we have to understand. That people do come with trauma, and there's certain things that now I believe, I know, just sidebar for a second, I don't believe that we are not responsible for other people's triggers. Absolutely. I think people have to do their own healing. But we do have to understand that abusive language and that is just, it's not cricket. It's not cool. And people will have a reaction. And so don't be surprised if, like me, you get pulled into HR, right? I think another thing too is chefs are seeing that kind of toxic environment is counterproductive to a healthy environment. It's a work environment. It's no different than an office. In fact, in terms of you've got a bunch of people who are getting paid to do a job and you have a leader. So why is one allowed to be toxic and the other one's not? I don't know. Another thing is liability, right? Now you're starting to get, it depends on the place. But definitely liability is something that chefs and owners and all that are really being careful about. And you're also seeing more, EAPs, employee assistance programs for drug abuse and addictions and all sorts of other things. So and diversity. Let's like diversity, which I too love. I love seeing different voices and different, just different people in the kitchen, as opposed to, white Europeans like it used to be back in the day. And I've even heard some chefs are banning swearing. Wow, that's insane. I love it. It's so cool. It's very different. Or, where anything out of line can be cause for immediate dismissal or at least discipline. So people are really buckling down on this old way of doing things. And if you're not part of it, you're out. We're understanding more about healthy work environments and also the impact it has on the final product. Like when people are passionate about what they do, about how they do it, how they craft things, and they feel supported and they're well trained and people listen to them and they're respected, or they're given feedback and they're given feedback without being criticized or, flogged in front of everybody. And they are allowed to offer ideas and thoughts, etc. Then guess what? The food reflects that positive energy. I feel so. May sound a little woo to you, but whatever. I think angry chefs produce angry food. Right? What's that movie? Like Water for Chocolate, I think. No, I'm trying to remember where it was. It's an old Spanish, like Spain Spanish movie. And this woman, like however she was feeling, that's what happened to the food. And so when she wanted to curse people, it went into the food and those people were cursed. It was just literally her emotions went into the food. In some way, we energetically pass into our work. And this, again, goes to anything you do. So I went off there for a while. So what does this have to do with you, my lovely viewer or listener? Well, I want to share with you what I learned to do when anger was about to get the best of me. And, the stuff I still have to do. There's still work. This is work I still do to this day. I was just laughing about my wife calls when I get upset, especially with my 2 teen boys. And I don't. It's very rare that I bark. But she'll warn them. She's like, don't get him to his kitchen voice. I have 2 kitchen voices. The one where I'm expediting. So it's very loud and it's very clear. That's kind of a smaller, that's not even that loud. And then there's the escalated one where you don't want to be around me when I get there. I don't want to be around me when I get there. So anyway, maybe that's why I needed to wear my white so I can get into that character. Anyway, I'm going to share some things that work for me. And of course, you can feel free to use these when you think you may be close to the boiling point of going off, or you think you're just going to blow a fuse. So I'm going to share my tips right after this quick break. Alrighty, mighty, welcome back, my young apprentice. Just kidding. If you're my apprentice, you'd be peeling 200 pounds of potatoes in the corner by now. Oh, the apprentices. All right, let's look at anger. Grr. So, what do you do? What do you do when you feel things are bubbling up and you're afraid that you're going to say something you may regret later, like I have done? Here's some things that really work. One, and you've heard, this is classic, and you probably heard your grandmother talking about this. It's just like old wives' tale kind of thing, but it's true. Just breathe. 3 deep breaths. Pema Chodron has a book. I read it years ago. It's called Taking the Leap. And Pema Chodron is an American Buddhist monk. And the whole book talks about something called Shenpa, which is Tibetan for hook. And she talks about how this is like, it's attachment. And how when we are hooked into something, it shuts us down. I mean, it's a fabulous book. I can't even try to condense this into a few sentences. But the one thing that she talks about is to break that hook, or to do it before you get hooked, is 3 deep breaths. That's it. 3 deep breaths. Like full belly. 3. And I will tell you, I have been in that same kitchen I talked about where I lost my temper, and it worked. Because what you're doing is also you're stretching the time between event, like catalyst, and response. So that is what the breath just really, it just attaches you to your body, it grounds you, and it removes the heat. And the thing is, like with all of these tips, you want to catch it before you just lose it. You want to do it before you go off the rails. So that's the first one. Second is like focusing on something. I had a colleague in that same kitchen who he had a little candle, like a little electric candle, and he would leave it right beside where he was working. We had a microphone just like this one here, if you're watching. And he had a little candle, and sometimes he would just take 10 seconds and just stare at this candle. And when you have that clear focus, it's like having those deep breaths. You have, so just like focusing on something on the wall or focusing on something on the floor before you get into anger, you can just, I'm going to look at this. 3, think before you say anything. I know it's very common. It's easy to say now, but when you're caught in the moment, again, just the breath and the focus will help you with that. It's just like, what am I about to say? What am I about to say? Is it going to be useful? Maybe not. 4, separate the person from the point. And this is, to talk about principles before personalities. And a lot of times we get caught up in not so much what the person said, but maybe how they said it or who they are. It could be someone that just, that type of person that they just blink the wrong way and you get all hot and bothered. It's just, that's a personality. Anyone else, you wouldn't worry, but there's something about them. And a lot of times, we won't get into this now, but a lot of times there's something about you that you see in them. You're like, we're all mirrors to one another. And so there's something in them that reminds you about something in you, and that's what you're actually pissed off about. Anyway, you're not thinking about that when they blink the wrong way. So understand that, is this a personality thing? What's really at play here? So again, it's just a quick question you can get just before you go off, right? 5, and I love this one. This is one of my favorites. Pretend there's a camera in the corner. Pretend there's a camera. Like, so there was a Harvard psychology. They did Harvard University psychology department. They did some study or something like that, and they showed that the brain can't distinguish between past memories and imagined future states. So, imagining that the camera sitting in the corner, recording your outburst and causing tremendous embarrassment, will register in your brain as if it was an actual past memory. Pretty cool. So you can imagine there's a camera watching you. Do you want to have a little bit of a hissy fit? Do you want to freak out in front of everyone? And listen, many times now with phone, people are recording. So is that something that you want to, is that going to be your legacy? So that can help you too. 6, empathy. And this does take emotional intelligence and practice. This is something we do all throughout the day, because when you get into that point where we feel like we're going to lose it, this is where that practice of empathy comes in. And understanding that, what may make you boil might be only surface level for someone, and vice versa. Like maybe that person is going through something that you don't know. They might be having a breakup. They might have a sick child. They might have whatever it is. I think about this all the time when I'm at the grocery store and the line's really slow. or at the coffee shop and something, and I feel like I'm being held up. And the barista is very like, what? Maybe they're just going through something. I don't know. And I think about that because it again, all of these things are to pause you. All of these tips I gave you are to pause you before you step into the tasty and delicious, self-righteous anger. And so the idea is to keep your EQ high, to keep your temperature low. Right? And so again, it's the idea is to catch the response before it happens. There's in dog training, there's that slip leash, right? Some people like them. Some we've used it. And the way we had explained, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's wrong. When you correct, it's just a little like tug, but it's interrupting the dog's thought pattern. Like you're interrupting its immediate response to something. So whether it sees a squirrel or another dog, and before it reacts, and you have to try to do it before, it's just a little tug to stop, so it interrupts. It's like a distraction. It's a correction. And in many ways, these tips are just like that. They're a correction. And they take you away from that immediate, hot, flashbang that you may want to step into. Right? And if you do wait, right? Like if you wait too long, if you wait too long, then your goose is cooked. It's too late. Right? And maybe you're angry because the goose is not cooked and you have service coming up. Anyway, who eats goose? I don't know. Maybe foie gras. Even then, mostly it's duck now. But I definitely have used these tips myself on the line, in service, in the heat of the moment. And it's really helped because what I see, and this is what you will see, is when you start to get into this practice, things calm down and you see the response. You start to interrupt your pattern. You start to interrupt how you would have done things in the past. And everyone around you is better for it. Now, I'm not talking about tamping it down. I'm not talking about just don't say anything and white knuckling it. I mean, you may have to do that at first, but outside of that, how are you in your, are you meditating? Are you gratitude? Is there therapy you need to use? How are you in general? Because that all bubbles up. Like I said, in the past, when I used to lose my cool, I had a lot of stuff going on. Again, empathy. I had a lot going on. So again, this is why it's so important to take care of yourself. Your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health. Are you exercising? You're moving? Being at work doesn't count. Are you doing yoga? Are you exercising? It's so important that you take care of yourself as well. It's not just in these moments. It's how you're holistically, how you are leading up to these moments. Anyway, even though I'm wearing this and I'm in character, I promise not to get upset if you don't subscribe, but I will be hurt and upset just a little bit. Anyway, I'm just kidding. It's just something between me and my therapist. We'll tackle that. Normalize therapy, everyone. Normalize therapy. If you found this episode useful, please share it with the angry people in your life. You can also review, leave comments, or like this, get notifications. And that'll help me get more reach, which is win-win for everyone. So big thanks to all of those who have been supporting this channel and podcast. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. So with that, homie, we're going to tackle the hoods. I just hope I don't get this dirty. We're going to tackle the hoods, pull out the stoves, clean behind. And with that, kitchen's closed. Now scram.